What's up, everybody? This is your boy, Pastor Bryson G. Baylor, lead pastor of the Kingdom Center International, where we are redefining life. Listen, welcome to another highlights of our Saturday services at the Kingdom Center, kind of like Sports Center, where you can get the top 10 plays of what you missed if you weren't there this past Saturday. Listen, we're doing a message series entitled UnPerfect. This is part 3 of 4. This message is entitled The Hookup, so let's jump right in it, and we'll see what we can get out of it, all right? Just in case you missed it, we were in 1 Peter chapter 1. Verse number 15 starts as this, says, "But like the Holy One who called you, be holy yourselves also in all your behavior, because it is written, you shall be holy, for I am holy." And so this message was entitled The Hookup. All right, kind of like Master P's song from back in 98, I got the hookup, holla if you hear me. Right? All right, so anyways, what we're talking about, though, is holiness. And for this message, I really do believe that I've barbecued and grilled one of our sacred cows in Christendom, holiness. I mean, we say it all the time. But I really don't think we get the true perspective or the true kingdom definition of what it really means. And so yeah, I just took it upon myself, led by the Spirit, to break it down and try to see what it meant. And we see this scripture. We say it all the time. It says, God says in Leviticus 19. That's where they sampled this from 1 Peter. It says, "Be ye holy, for I am holy." That's God talking to the people of God. God says, "Be ye holy, for I am holy." And so we need to understand God's holiness before we can understand ours. And so technically, we define holiness meaning as hostility and hatred to sin. All right? Traditionally in America, our history has been, hey, you're holy if you hate sin, if you don't do sin, if you're not affiliated with sin, if you're not near sin, if you don't touch sin, if you don't look like sin, if you don't smell like sin. I hate it. I'm abject to it. I don't do it, right? And so we refer God's holiness as to that. And so our definition of God's holiness becomes what we think it means. So we think God's holiness means that it's his hatred to sin. It's his abject disdain or disgust and hatred of sin. But it really could mean more than that. But let's keep looking. All right, we see God is referred to as holy in Isaiah chapter 6, verse 3. We see the angels say that they're in the temple calling God and saying, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord." Right? And so we also see that the demons refer to Jesus as the Holy One of God in Mark 1, verse 24. And so I had a problem because I'm thinking like, okay, if holiness means hatred to sin and hostility to sin, that means that the angels were calling God, basically, if you were to interpret it and break it down, it would mean they were saying hatred to sin, hatred to sin, hatred to sin is the Lord of hosts. Or that the demons who were recognizing Jesus, they were saying, "We know who you are. You're the hater of sin of God." And I began to think, well, if that's what holiness means, that doesn't make sense because there's no way that hatred of sin can mean what God means. All right? And so, because I define it as this, if holiness meant hatred to sin or abject hatred to sin, that would literally mean that God would have to remove himself from the earth in order to maintain his definition or of his representation of holiness, because the whole world, right, is under the system of the devil, the kingdom of darkness versus the kingdom of light. And so there's a lot of the kingdom of darkness and not a lot of kingdom of light, but yet God is omnipresent, right? God is everywhere at all times. David said, "Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I hide from your presence?" So that means God is omnipresent. But if sin is present and God is hates sin and he's abject to sin and he's holy, that means that God and sin would never mix. God and sin would never be in the same place because he's abject to it, because he hates it. He has a hostility towards it. Because as we define it, as we do in church, like we're not supposed to be near it. Don't go near a club. Don't go near it. Don't go near a bottle of wine. Don't go near, anything that could be quote unquote sinful. We're in the world, but not of the world. But if that was the case, then God would literally have to remove himself from the earth in order to maintain that. And if God did remove himself from the earth, the whole earth would crumble, the atmosphere would decompose, the chairs that we're sitting on, the cars that we drive would literally disintegrate in a blink of an eye, because God's presence would remove himself from the earth, from the universe, because sin is rampant. And so I discovered that sin doesn't really just mean hatred of sin, but it also means power, God's justice, his goodness, mercy, love, and his hatred of sin. So it's not just hatred of sin or hostility of sin, but it also means power, justice, goodness, mercy, and love. And so the true definition of holiness is not one of separation, but rather infusion. Watch this. It's not of God's separation from the world because of sin, or his separation from the affairs of humanity because of sin, but it's rather his perfect infusion into the world. Let me tell you, God is so holy that he can be in the midst of us sinful people. He can reach down and still save us and pick us up out of mess and save us from ourselves and still not be defied by it or not be defiled by it, because he's still all the time powerful, all the time good, all the time just, all the time merciful, all the time loving, and all the time hating the sin. He's holy because he's able to be himself and do God no matter where he is, no matter what he does. All right. And so when the scripture tells us to be holy like God, we ought to pick up our cue. And no, that don't mean to leave. And that don't mean that we got to wear white and frown all the time and say, you can't do this. You can't play basketball. You can't swim. You can't do this because we're holy. But rather it means that we ought to be able to do the things of the world, not sin. But we ought to be able to do and live life and still maintain our identity, maintain our power, maintain our goodness, maintain our love, maintain our justice, because we are holy as the Lord is holy. And so we see that being holy doesn't mean doing holy. God said, be ye holy, for I am holy. So we see it's a quality, not an action. God never said do holy, but he said be holy. All right. And the term saint literally means the holy one. So in order to be holy, there has to be an inherent quality of holiness. It's like me trying to be a woman. I can't be a woman no matter how hard I try, because I just don't have the tools. I don't have the nature. I don't have the estrogen in me. I don't have the mentality, because that's not who I am. But watch this. Many people try to be the opposite sex. They try to do the things. They try to get the swagger. They try to get the walk. They try to get the talk, do the hair. But no matter how much hair you put on, how much nails you put on your hands, you'll never be a woman, because that's not who you are. You can act like a woman, but you can't be a woman. And it's the same as holiness. God is not telling us to do holiness or to act holy or to do the things that we think describe holiness, but rather he's saying be holy. So there's a definite distinction between doing and being. And this being requires an inherent quality of holiness. And this is the problem, because holiness is not something that you can get on your own, except you're God. The only person in the universe who has holiness of his own is God. Rather, holiness is something that is granted from connection, relationship, and knowledge of God. Look at this. The angels are called holy. Why? Because they're connected to God. Because they are in relationship with God. They're in association with God. Whereas Lucifer, the fallen angel, and the other angels who used to be angels but now are demons, they're not holy anymore. Why? Because their connection with God has been severed. They're no longer in relationship. They're no longer in association with God. And as a result of that lack of association, they are no longer holy. They no longer have that equality given to them or granted to them because of their association. And therefore, the only way to achieve holiness on our end as people of God is to have the hookup. To have the hookup with God. We got to be connected with God. In order for us to be holy as God is holy, we have to be connected. We have to be hooked up to God. And so we got to understand, listen, if you want to know God, if you want to be connected, if you want to be holy as God is holy, you got to be hooked up with God. You got to have a relationship. You got to be able to say, you know what, whatever God is saying, I'm going to say. Whatever God is doing, I'm going to do. Because whatever God does, I'm going to do. Because I'm connected. Because I'm hooked up with God. John chapter 15 lets us know that Jesus says we ought to abide in him and let his words abide in us. Or in other words, be connected, be so hooked up with God. And as a result of our hooked upness with God, we'll be able to produce much fruit, and not just any kind of fruit, but fruit that lasts, because this glorifies God the Father. And so whenever we're hooked up with God, whenever we're abiding in God, whenever we're connected with God, we'll be able to produce the fruit of God, be able to produce what God would desire for our lives as holy men and women of God, as saints. So the point is this: you got to have a hookup. You got to have a hookup with God. You got to know God. You got to be in a relationship with God to be holy. It's not clothes you wear. It's not where you go, but it's who you are on the inside. And unless you got the hookup with God, I'm sorry, you could do holiness, but you won't be holy. You can say holiness. You can put the banners up. You can try to walk around like it, but you won't be holy. Because it comes through knowledge and association and connection with God. You know, Jesus said about the false prophets, many in that day will say, Lord, Lord, have we not done this and that, prophesied, done miracles, and healed in your name? He said, depart from me, you workers of iniquity. I never knew you. I never knew you. We never had relationship. We never had connection. You were never holy. I don't know you. God says, listen, get the hookup. If you get the hookup, your life will be blessed. You'll be holy as he is holy. Be connected with God. You got the hookup. I got the hookup. Holla if you hear me. Peace and blessings.